Hello and welcome. This is CNC3. I'm Ira Mathur. This country is in the midst of a flooding disaster. Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Bisesa has described the flooding from Chaguanas, Felicity, Couva, Claxton Bay, Marabella, Gasparillo to St. Joseph and Princestown as sad and devastating. In Williamsville, 200 residents are temporarily homeless. They lost everything in the floods. There were landslides in Mocha, Maraval and Carenage. Floodwaters have shut down Petrotrin, caused cesspits to overflow, disrupted electricity and ruined appliances. Public health officials are concerned about waterborne diseases from contaminants in the effluents of the flood. There are warnings of a new wave of mosquito infestation which could feed the dengue outbreak. While we applaud government's relief to the victims of flooding, one thing is clear: all systems have failed us. From the ODPM with its disappointing coordination of relief to inadequate drainage and reforestation, from quarrying to littering. We are lucky, as flooding intensifies in Trinidad and Tobago, that no lives were lost this time. To get to the root of the problem, my guests today are Conservator of Forests, Anthony Ramnarayan, Director of Drainage, Shamshad Mohammed, and from the Ministry of Works, and Garvin Nicholas, the Prime Minister's Press Secretary. Welcome, gentlemen. Before we start, let's take a look at some of the images of flooding that we've been seeing this past week. Well, Garvin, every time I spoke to you in the past week, you were about to board a helicopter with the Prime Minister. Can you give us an image of what you've seen in the past week? Paint us a picture.
Well, in addition to what we've just seen, of course, being out in the field, we witnessed a number of landslides. We have seen areas where there's debris 5 and 6 feet high in people's homes. We've seen people's homes at the brink of collapse at the sides of rivers. It has been an absolute mess. Interestingly, I noticed in the footage that you were just showing that a lot of the water was coming down the roads, but not down the drains, which suggests that the drains have been clogged and therefore the waters are diverted elsewhere. But even as I sit here today, I can tell you that I have reports coming to the studio of major landslides in Santa Cruz, and unfortunately there may even be a suggestion of loss of life. So that whilst you started, and the history has been so far that we have not had any loss of life, I am getting a report at the moment that there is one person who is deemed non-responsive.
Garvin, do we have a national disaster on our hands?
Well, I don't think we have a national disaster per se. We've had major problems in a lot of areas. I think that if we had not acted sooner, we could contribute to a natural disaster or a major disaster. Having said that, the ODPM has actually activated its national emergency communications because of the possibility of loss of life.
Well, and I want to come back to that, but very quickly, Shamshad, were you surprised by the flooding this year? Every year, despite our long dry season, the Drainage Division is blamed for the clogged waterways. Is it any different this year?
Well, I was surprised at the extent of the flooding, the height of water in some cases. Flooding is really an eventual process after heavy rainfall in many cases. What we've tried to do is clean our rivers, our watercourses, so that when areas are inundated, the runoff can be very quickly. What happened is that this particular year, because of the amount of slash and burn we had on the hillsides, the amount of development and the long dry season, you find that when these heavy rains come, it washes on all of that debris and silt into the systems. Every time there's this type of rainfall, we then go embark on another program of cleaning up their watercourses as best as we can.
Mr. Ramnarayan Antony, we know deforestation and quarrying in the Northern Range has released thousands of tons of soil into the rivers. How much of the state's forests have been reduced in the last 30 years?
There has been a gradual reduction in terms of deforestation caused not only by timber sales, which we have since stopped, but by a lot of slash and burn agriculture. And the Northern Range has now become a zone which contributes significantly to flooding. This year we had a severe dry season, and we had about 800 hectares of vegetation lost on the Northern Range in our forest reserves. We also had about another 1,000 hectares lost throughout the country. So altogether, the exposed soil and the heavy rainfalls have now contributed to the devastating floods that we have been experiencing.
Hasn't the government been monitoring this situation? Who's to take responsibility for the drainage and for the deforestation?
Our responsibility at the Drainage Division is the maintenance and development of all major watercourses. There are other areas, other agencies that have responsibility. For instance, the Highways Division will be responsible for the drainage along major roads and main roads, the culverts and the bridges. The Regional Corporation will be responsible for the drainage within the communities. And like in Port of Spain here, the city engineer, the city hall is responsible for the drainage within the city itself.
Well, clearly somebody is not doing their job.
You see, it's not just that. Yes, we have to keep the channels clean and clear, but we must also understand that most of the infrastructure that exists today, the drainage infrastructure that is, are 1 to 2 generations old. And even with the Drainage Division, the development works we've done over the past, let's say, a decade or so, it has not been able to keep up with the expanded and the geometrically increasing development of the country. So our drainage channels are more or less very similar to what it would have been 50 years ago.
So that obviously needs a rehauling.
Yes,
okay.
But in many cases we cannot develop the major rivers because we have so many people who would have developed along the river banks. And it's just impossible. While in some areas you can increase the capacity of the river, which is what is required, in other cases you can't do it along the same river. So it makes no sense widening a river in one point, but it narrows at the other point because of development. To do a proper analysis and a proper design and then proper construction work, it would probably embark on a massive acquisition campaign.